For decades, Shania Twain stood on stages around the world singing about freedom, confidence, and love, while carrying a silence that few people ever truly understood. Behind the anthems and the smiles was a woman trained from childhood to endure pain quietly, to survive without asking for help, and to keep devastating truths hidden behind success. Now, at a point in life when most legends protect their image at all costs, Shania Twain has chosen something far more dangerous: honesty. What she has finally confirmed is not gossip, not scandal, but a truth about survival, betrayal, and loss that reshapes everything we thought we knew about her. A child taught to endure, not to dream. Long before Shania Twain became one of the most powerful names in music, she learned a lesson no child should ever have to learn. Survival comes before dreams. Born as Eileen Regina Edwards in Windsor, Ontario, she was raised in the small mining town of Timmins, a place defined by cold winters, limited work, and constant financial strain. Hunger was not an occasional hardship in her household. It was routine. She often went to school with an empty stomach, unable to focus, too ashamed to ask classmates or teachers for help. Poverty was not just a lack of money. It was a quiet humiliation she carried alone. At home, life was shaped by constant instability. Her stepfather, Jerry Twain, legally adopted her when she was young and became the only father figure she ever knew. To those on the outside, he often appeared hard-working and dependable. Within the family, however, his behavior was unpredictable and emotionally distressing. Shania grew up in a state of quiet vigilance, never knowing what mood would greet her at the door. She later recalled nights spent awake, listening closely to the sounds of the house, fearing that arguments might spiral beyond control. Certain moments left a lasting imprint on her memory, convincing her for years that she had witnessed the worst possible outcomes. Over time, the instability affected Shania personally as well. She found herself growing up in an environment where personal boundaries were repeatedly crossed, leaving deep emotional and psychological scars. These experiences shaped how she saw herself and her body, pushing her to hide, withdraw, and imagine a future where she could feel safe and in control. This was not ordinary adolescent self-doubt, but a child's instinctive response to prolonged fear, an attempt to become invisible in order to survive. Despite everything happening behind closed doors, Shania was expected to perform. Music was not a hobby. It was a necessity. By the age of 8, she was singing in adult-only bars to help pay the bills. These were not family venues. They were loud, chaotic, and often dangerous. She learned to smile on stage while pretending nothing was wrong at home. She carried herself like an adult because she had no choice. At the same time, her mother struggled with deep depression, sometimes staying in bed for days. Shania stepped into a parental role, preparing clothes, caring for siblings, and keeping the household functioning long before she understood what childhood was supposed to be. At 10 years old, she wrote her first song, not about dreams or romance, but about sadness. The song was for her mother, an attempt to pull her back into life. Even then, music was not escape through fantasy, it was survival through expression. This foundation of silence, endurance, and responsibility shaped everything that came after. The world would later see a confident superstar who sang about independence and power. What it never saw was the child who learned early that speaking up could destroy a family. And that silence, however painful, sometimes felt safer than truth. The night everything ended and adulthood began. In late autumn, Shania Twain's life fractured in a single phone call that would permanently alter her path. Her mother Sharon and her stepfather Jerry were killed instantly in a head-on collision with a logging truck while driving near a remote work site in northern Ontario. Shania was in her early 20s, just beginning to believe that music might finally offer a way out of the life she had endured. Instead, grief arrived without warning, violent, disorienting, and absolute. The loss was not only emotional. Overnight, Shania became responsible for her 3 younger siblings. There was no time to process shock, no space to mourn properly. Survival mode returned immediately, the same instinct she had learned as a child. Dreams were postponed without discussion. Nashville could wait. Ambition could wait. Family could not. She moved back to Timmins and took any work she could find to keep the household together. Singing, once again, became a means to an end rather than a pursuit of fame. She secured a long-term performing job at a resort in Huntsville, Ontario, where she sang night after night in large revue-style shows. It was steady income, something she had never known growing up. For several years, her life followed a punishing routine: perform, earn, return home, repeat. She was raising children while barely feeling like an adult herself. This period of her life rarely makes headlines, but it defined her resilience. She later admitted that she never fully processed her parents' deaths at the time because there was simply no room to fall apart. Grief was postponed, packed away with childhood trauma and fear, stored for a future moment she didn't yet know would come. What she did know was responsibility. She kept her siblings clothed, fed, and in school, often at the expense of her own emotional health. When her siblings finally became independent enough for her to leave, Shania returned to the dream she had suspended years earlier. She moved to Nashville carrying little more than determination and the voice she had been using to survive since childhood. The industry did not welcome her easily. She struggled financially again, cleaned houses to pay for lessons, and faced rejection for refusing to fit neatly into country music's expectations. But something had changed. This time, she was no longer a frightened child or a young woman running from trauma. She was someone who had already lost everything once and survived it. That knowledge hardened her resolve. The pain she never had time to grieve was still there, quietly shaping her work ethic, her discipline, and her refusal to quit. Love, control, and the illusion of safety. When Shania Twain met producer Robert "Mutt" Lang, it felt less like chance and more like rescue. He was already a legend in the music industry, disciplined, powerful, and deeply respected. After years of instability, rejection, and loss, Lang represented something Shania had rarely experienced: certainty. He believed in her voice when others hesitated, and that belief quickly evolved into an intense personal and creative bond. Their relationship moved fast. They married quietly, and almost immediately their lives became inseparable, professionally and privately. Together, they created music that reshaped country culture, blending pop hooks with country storytelling in a way the genre had never fully embraced. The success was overwhelming. Shania became a global phenomenon, selling records at a historic scale, filling stadiums, and redefining what a female country artist could be. On the surface, this partnership looked like perfection. Langa provided structure, precision, and control in the studio. Shania delivered charisma, vulnerability, and an unmistakable voice. Their songs spoke of confidence, independence, and romantic devotion, anthems that made millions believe they were witnessing a fairy tale marriage unfolding in real time. But beneath that image, cracks were forming quietly. Shania later admitted that she often confused control with safety. After growing up in chaos, strict structure felt comforting. Langa was meticulous, demanding, and deeply involved in every aspect of production. While he never tried to change her voice, he controlled the sound, the rhythm, the direction. Shania pushed to have her name recognized as co-producer, a fight she won, but only after tension and resistance. Even success required negotiation. As fame intensified, isolation followed. Touring schedules were relentless. Studio sessions were exhausting. Shania began to feel a loneliness she couldn't explain, married to someone she loved, yet emotionally distant. She sensed something shifting, but couldn't identify it clearly. Her instinct, learned from childhood, was not to confront immediately, but to endure quietly. At the same time, her body began betraying her. She noticed subtle changes in her voice: weakness, strain, loss of control, symptoms she didn't yet understand. Doctors had no answers. She pushed forward anyway, believing perseverance could fix anything. After all, it always had before. The illusion of safety held, until it didn't. What Shania didn't realize then was that the very relationship she believed had saved her would soon reopen wounds she never fully healed. And when that illusion finally collapsed, it would take not only her marriage, but her voice, her identity, and her will to live with it. Betrayal, silence, and the moment her voice disappeared. The collapse did not arrive with a single confession. It came slowly, through unease, unanswered questions, and a growing sense that something fundamental was wrong. While working and touring relentlessly, Shania Twain began to feel profoundly alone inside her marriage. She described it later as a quiet loneliness, the kind that settles in when communication disappears. Instinctively, she turned to the person she trusted most outside her marriage, her close friend and personal assistant, Marie-Anne Thiebaud. What Shania did not know was that the woman she was confiding in was at the center of what would become the most devastating betrayal of her life. When the truth surfaced, it did not come gently. Her husband, Robert Mutt Lang, was accused of having an affair with Mary Ann, someone Shania considered family. Lang denied it for months. The denial, the silence, and the refusal to answer questions hurt her more deeply than the affair itself. She later said the unanswered questions left emotional wounds that never fully closed. The marriage ended. The partnership that had shaped an era of music dissolved quietly, but the impact was violent. Shania retreated from public life as headlines focused less on her artistry and more on the scandal. For the first time since childhood, she stopped performing entirely. What the public didn't know was that her body was shutting down alongside her heart. Around this period, Shania lost control of her voice. At first, it felt like stress. Then it became frightening. She could no longer project. Notes disappeared mid-phrase. Eventually, she could barely sing at all. Doctors struggled to explain it. The diagnosis came later. Complications linked to Lyme disease, which damaged her vocal nerves, and a condition called dysphonia, where trauma and muscle constriction prevent the voice from functioning properly. For a singer whose identity was built on sound, the loss was catastrophic. Shania believed she would never sing again. She was too ashamed to explain why she had disappeared, even to fans who had followed her for decades. Years passed without new music. 15 years went by without a studio album. To the world, she vanished. Privately, her mental health deteriorated. The betrayal reopened every buried trauma from her childhood: the abuse, the fear, the silence. At her lowest point, living in Switzerland, she stood on a balcony considering ending her life. What stopped her was her son. Motherhood anchored her when nothing else could: survival, truth, and the long road back. Healing did not arrive as inspiration or sudden strength. It arrived slowly, through honesty Shania Twain had avoided her entire life. For decades, she had learned to survive by detaching from pain, by treating each chapter of her life as if it belonged to someone else. After the betrayal and the loss of her voice, that strategy stopped working. The silence became too heavy. The past refused to stay buried. What finally changed was her decision to speak, not as a celebrity, but as a survivor. Writing her memoir forced her to confront memories she had never allowed herself to process: the hunger, the abuse, the fear that telling the truth would destroy her family. She admitted publicly that there were moments when she wanted to die, not because she lacked success, but because the emotional weight had become unbearable. For the first time, she stopped protecting the image and began protecting herself. At the same time, her body demanded attention. Years of untreated Lyme disease had damaged the nerves controlling her voice. The diagnosis explained the physical loss, but it didn't erase the fear. She still believed singing might be gone forever. Doctors eventually offered a risky solution: vocal surgery that would require her to be awake and singing during the procedure. The idea terrified her, but silence terrified her more. The surgery left a visible scar across her neck, one she no longer tried to hide. To Shania, it became proof of survival. Recovery was slow and humbling. She had to relearn how to sing, how to trust her body again, how to accept a voice that sounded different from the one she had lost. Control, once her safety net, had to be surrendered, confirming the truth and choosing peace. At 60, Shania Twain no longer speaks to protect myths. She speaks to confirm truths people whispered for years about her childhood, her marriage, her disappearance, and the cost of silence. She has acknowledged that the rumors were never exaggerated. If anything, they were incomplete. The abuse was real. The betrayal was devastating. The loss of her voice was not symbolic. It was physical, psychological, and deeply personal. What she confirms now is not scandal, but survival. She explains that losing her voice forced her to confront a lifetime of suppressed pain, that the marriage ending felt like losing her parents all over again, that forgiveness was never about excusing what happened, but about refusing to let it define her future. She has said clearly that she does not want personal ties with her former husband again, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Her later music reflects that shift. It speaks less about fantasy and more about acceptance, aging, body autonomy, fear, and freedom. She no longer hides scars, physical or emotional. She no longer flattens herself to feel safe. The confidence audiences once saw as performance has become something quieter and more grounded. Shania Twain's legacy is no longer just measured in records sold or awards won. It lives in the fact that she chose truth over silence, peace over endurance, and self-worth over survival at any cost. The girl who once hated being seen now stands openly in her own skin, not unbroken, but unashamed. She didn't return to prove anything. She returned because she finally could. Shania Twain has shared her truth after a lifetime of silence, not to shock, but to survive. Do you think honesty comes easier with age or only after everything has been lost? Let us know your thoughts, and if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories behind the legends.